The confessional is empty, yet the walls still bleed. Lake Vermilion, Illinois, spring of 1888. Dawn should have greeted Saint Aurelia's with 7 silver chimes, but the prairie heard only wind and a single note cut short, as though the rope itself recoiled in dread. Chapel lamps that usually glowed until matins guttered out at midnight. Wax froze in mid-drip, as if the flame had been ordered to kneel. Outside, pine branches scratched the stained-glass saints, sketching letters no living tongue could read. A sleepless groundskeeper later swore he saw a silent procession of veiled novices glide toward the freight spur, each cradling a velvet suitcase and a candle already snuffed. By sunrise, their footprints had vanished, erased by a frost that settled only on monastery stones. Between 1888 and 1891, 12 novitiates, brides of Christ sworn to silence, obedience and perpetual mercy, entered that limestone fortress. None ever walked back out. Parish bulletins filed the absences as clerical oversights. The diocesan ledger stamped each girl with a single word: transferred. Their names were whispered once, then struck from every roll. Yet hidden in an attic trunk rested another accounting, pages crusted with soot, margins scarred by trembling Latin, that priced each soul higher than gold, higher than frankincense, higher than the cathedral spire the bishop raised with their ransom. Tonight those rusted clasps snap open. The trail leads from a strangled bell rope to a railcar bound south, from a surgeon's perfumed clinic to a veranda overlooking foreign seas. It winds through corridors washed with incense and secrets, past ledgers inked in hush money, into rooms where vows were bartered for profit. We will hear the voices the church spent fortunes to silence, sift the ash of forgotten candles, and decide for ourselves whether faith can be a fortress or merely a market place. Lake Vermilion lies low in the Illinois prairie, its dawns normally tuned to the discipline of bells drifting 5 miles in every direction, calling milk hands from their straw pallets and Lutheran schoolchildren from their feather mattresses. But on Monday, the 2nd of April 1888, the valley woke to a vacancy so absolute that even the wind seemed to hush. Frost clung to pond reeds, fences, and the copper dome of Saint Aurelia's Convent of Perpetual Mercy, yet the clapper in the 3-ton bell never broke the hush. Old Gabe Henley, who delivered eggs to the convent kitchens, paused his rig at the tree line and waited to hear the familiar heptad of bronze notes. He would later swear under oath that he had heard a single strangled chime at exactly 3 minutes past 3, as if a throat had cleared itself of prayer, and then nothing but a metallic wheeze. Henley's horse pinned its ears, sensing vibrations that would never fully pass into sound. Within the hour, farmers at 3 separate homesteads confirmed a similar half-note, a hollowed-out reverberation that died mid-arc. None of the men owned watches fine enough to synchronize, but their testimonies aligned to the minute ones compared against the rail station's master clock, 3:03 a.m. Metropolitan newspapers would later dismiss the concurrence as mass imagination, a prairie variant of the seashore's phantom siren. Yet the sworn statements remain in the LaSalle County Courthouse archive, each dotted with inkwells of incredulous scrawl by the clerk who had to record them. At 6:30, Sister Clementina, gatekeeper, laundress and wielder of the convent's only iron key to the East Portcullis, pulled the gate for the first deliveries: Henley's eggs, Julius Langer's milk, and a wagon-load of rye from the Schmidt brothers. She greeted each driver with the same phrase, "Christ keep you," but her eyes flicked repeatedly toward the silent tower. Lang, not a man to pry, finally asked if the belfry rope had frozen overnight. Sister Clementina, cheeks sallow from vigil fatigue, whispered, "There will be a note for you later, Mr. Lang," then turned the key with a tremor obvious even to Julius, whose vision was blurring from cataracts. Before the farmers could exchange another word, she vanished behind the gate, bolt clanging home. At precisely 7:15, matins should have been concluding. Instead, 2 altar candles paced in the chancery corridor guttered out within seconds of each other, despite being trimmed only the previous evening. Novice Veronica, age 19, tasked with rekindling them, found the wax half liquid, as if the flames had boiled their own foundations. She later wrote to her twin in Davenport, "It felt as though the wick gave up." Veronica would mail that letter secretly through the infirmary porter. It remains remarkably intact in a family bite. Blee. Edges browned by candle soot. By 8:30, the village postmaster, Abe Hancock, received an unsigned diocesan memorandum delivered by a curt hireling on a rented gelding. The sheet bore the red insignia of Bishop Michael Kavanagh, yet lacked a name beneath the seal, an omission unheard of in clerical correspondence. The single paragraph read, "Sisters Julia Gertrude, Mary Dominic, Agnes Benedetta, unaccounted at Matins." Mother Seraphina reports minor scheduling error. No public inquiry forthcoming. Hancock, a Congregationalist suspicious of Catholic titles, nonetheless filed the memo in his lockbox marked "Clergy Urgent" and noted the date carefully. He never imagined the document would become Exhibit C in a state investigation 3 years later, but he did remark to his wife that evening that Rome must be running late for breakfast. Inside Saint Aurelia's, Mother Seraphina convened the surviving 32 sisters in the refectory. She spoke softly enough that only those nearest the lectern caught every word, yet the hush magnified her consonants so that even novices stacking pew dust in the adjacent nave felt the sentences vibrate through the stone. She said the missing women had been summoned to an archdiocesan retreat for the refinement of their interior silence, a phrase too abstruse for most of the novices to pass. Sister Magdalene, 70 and half-deaf, asked for the bishop's signed instruction. Seraphina smiled, eyes like polar ice undisturbed under snow, and answered that obedience did not require ink. Meanwhile, the bell tower stood padlocked. No sexton was sent up to diagnose the malfunction, and by noon rumors fermented in the tavern where German laborers took their beer. Some said the bronze tongue had cracked. Others claimed lightning struck the tower in the night, though no storm had ventured within 50 miles. Only at Vespers, when children returning from school dared to cross the convent perimeter, did anyone learn of the satin veil. They spotted it first from the orchard wall, a flash of ivory fluttering behind louver slats. 4 boys, each armed with a slingshot and the brazen energy of 12-year-olds, scaled the wall and clambered an apple tree whose upper branches brushed the tower's pointing. One boy, Caleb Hines, later testified that he reached a height where the east shutter gaped wide enough to glimpse the veil pinned through its center to the iron clapper. The fabric, Caleb claimed, glowed pearlescent and bore a maroon blotch the size of a communion wafer. He swore the stain shimmered wetly, though the morning sun had already dried every roof in the valley. What Caleb did not describe, because he could not have smelled it from the orchard, was the sharp, bitter trace of laudanum steeped into the silk. That odor would confound Sheriff Darrow when he broke the tower lock a fortnight later at Bishop Harding's request. The sheriff, ignorant of pharmacy, yet born with a hound's nostrils, recognized opium tincture from battlefield surgeries in '63. "How," he asked the bishop, "does a nun's bridal veil come to reek of morphine?" The bishop crossed himself and murmured a deflection about hospital duties, never meeting Darrow's eyes. While the tower remained sealed, Mother Seraphina issued new instructions. Novices were forbidden to fetch water after sunset. No letters were to be posted unless countersigned by Sister Agatha, and the infirmary wit, Ang, normally open to local farmers too poor for a town physician, was closed for disinfection. Sacks of lime powder appeared by nightfall, stacked like bleached sentries outside the infirmary door. Sister Honoré supervised their deployment, white dust rising around her habit until she looked like a ghost officiating her own burial. Outside the cloister, the village debated. Elderly widow Martha Bainbridge insisted she'd heard weeping at 4 a.m. Her son chalked it up to the river ice breaking. 3 Swedish rail workers reported seeing a lantern procession on the tracks, but admitted they were drunk on schnapps. Only Gabe Henley's testimony about the strangled bell remained unanimous among the affidavits, perhaps because sound travels purer than fear. By the second night without bells, liturgical time itself felt fractured. The priest at Sacred Heart Parish, miles away, overslept matins because he relied on the distant clang for an alarm. He rose instead to a silence so saturated he thought he'd woken deaf. He wrote in his diary, "An hour of blindness for the ears." That entry now lies in diocesan storage, page corners curled like petals. On the third morning, Bishop Kavanagh finally dispatched a courier carrying a travelling reliquary and a sealed satchel of documents. The courier, Brother Silvanus, recorded in his log that Mother Seraphina met him at the convent gate personally, accepted the satchel, and waved him off before he could deliver the reliquary to the chapel. Silvanus found the dismissal irregular, but noted, "She spoke with such serenity that one doubts her even when one's own eyes beg for explanation." Inside the satchel lay unsigned transfer forms for Sisters Julia Gertrude, Mary Dominic, and Agnes Benedetta. Each file contained a single departure line, no destination noted, and a diocesan seal applied so hurriedly the ink blotched. Sister Agatha slipped the forms into the archives and logged them under Frontier Mission Assignments, confidential. When the State Commission subpoenaed the archives in 1891, that ledger page bore 3 fresh scratches across the destination column, as if a pen nib had jabbed through in rage, tearing the parchment into a grin. In the village, superstitions mushroomed. Children began chalking crosses on gateposts. Mary O'Leary, midwife and hedge witch in equal measure, brewed juniper and salt to fling at the convent wall, muttering a psalm in her native Gaelic. The Lutheran pastor preached caution, "We do not meddle in Rome's affairs." Yet his own daughter, Elise, refused to practice her violin within earshot of the silent tower, insisting she felt watched through the latticework. By Friday, postal carrier Abel Dunnett arrived with 3 crated rolls of ecclesiastical brocade addressed to Mother Seraphina's personal name, rare honor for a woman religious. The manifest cited vestment refurbishment, but Sister Clementina directed the crates to the locked north wing rather than the sewing parlor. Dunnett glimpsed one corner of fabric, crimson damask threaded with gold, unsuitable for a convent pledged to poverty. In his service journal he scribbled, "Riches hide rot." Later that evening, cowherd Lucas Martel, tending his herd near the convent boundary, heard what he described as a choir humming underwater. He followed the sound to the orchard wall, where wind should have scattered voices. Instead, he felt vibrations coursing through the stone. Martel, of stolid French-Canadian stock, spat twice over his shoulder and fled, leaving 3 calves untended. He would not retrieve them until daylight. Back in the tower, the veil remained pinned. No novice was allowed to remove it. Rumor said Mother Seraphina alone held the key now stowed beneath her pillow. Novice Veronica, counting the pulses of silence between her racing thoughts, realized dawn's missing bells had displaced more than routine. They had amputated time. She found herself praying at random hours, terrified she might be sinning by mistake. Her diary entry apologizes to Christ for offering compline at terce because the sun refuses to tell me his hour. On the 9th day, Mother Seraphina summoned every sister to the crypt for a liturgy of rededication. She opened with Isaiah 30:15, "In quietness and in trust shall be your strength." Then came the new rule. All sisters would henceforth observe strict silence from sunset until sunrise. Questions died unheard. Novices filed back to their dormitories like shadows sewn to the floor. Outside, the bell remained dumb, its clapper wed to a veil soaked in narcotic sleep. The county newspaper finally took notice on day 11, running a 3-inch column headlined, "Mysterious Quiet at Catholic Convent." The reporter quoted unnamed townsfolk, each contradicting the last, then closed with a shrug. Perhaps the sisters have simply discovered the purest form of prayer: silence. The editor never learned his typesetter had removed a final sentence. Yet in that hush, some say they hear the faint ringing of coins. If that silence chills you, tap like now. Every click keeps this testimony above the flood of forgetfulness. While the presses cooled, Mother Seraphina drafted a letter to Chicago's Archbishop Harding. Village unrest growing. Request immediate shipment of additional laudanum and 2 strong boxes. Trust the cost will be amortized by forthcoming consignments. The next train south carried her sealed envelope, conductor's ledger recording only, "Priority ecclesiastical pouch, do not delay." The bell tower's lock would not meet its key again for 14 months, and when it did, the sheriff's lamplight would reveal that the veil's maroon blotch had spread outward like a blood vortex, darkening every petal of silk. But for now, the stain waited, whispering its narcotic perfume into limestone dust, marking the moment the convent exchanged its vocation for commerce, and the prairie learned to measure dawn by dread instead of bells. Bishop Michael Kavanagh arrived in Lake Vermilion on a rain-slick October afternoon in 1879, the carriage wheels groaning as they climbed the Serpentine Drive toward what locals called the Baron's Folly. The mansion, abandoned since the hardwood market collapsed, rose from the pines like a stranded galleon. 3 wings of grey limestone, each studded with lancet windows and crowned by crenellated parapets scavenged from a medieval sketchbook. Moss veiled the eaves, bats ruled the belfry, but Kavanagh saw not ruin, only potential. 40 acres of second-growth white pine surrounded the estate, and a disused rail spur kissed its western wall, a remnant of the Baron's grand plan to shuttle timber straight to Chicago. Where the Baron had hauled logs, the bishop envisioned souls, and, if Providence permitted, coffers lined for the cathedral he hoped to raise on the far horizon. By winter the deed had been signed, the lumber baron's debts annihilated, by diocesan funds quietly diverted from a missionary account, and Kavanagh returned with 3 wagons of artisans. They repointed the chimneys, shaved rot from sills, replastered ceilings where raccoons had wintered, and, at the bishop's peculiar insistence, installed a network of narrow service corridors behind every major wall. For penitent circulation, he told the architect, though the phrase found no precedent in canon law. When the masons queried why the south cloister required a windowless sub-level reachable only through a trapdoor beneath the choir loft, the bishop answered by raising his hand in blessing and offering double wages. Curiosity dissolved. His next decision was to appoint a superior, someone whose charisma could pacify Protestant suspicion, yet whose obedience would not waver when unusual instructions arrived from Chancery. He found her in Boston, cloistered behind the red brick walls of St. Winifred's. Sister Seraphina, born Cordelia Grace Lowell, descendant of maritime stock, rumored to have tamed an unruly novitiate simply by reading the Rule of Benedict until the women wept from shame. She possessed glacier blue eyes that seemed carved from northern icebergs and a diction equal parts finishing school elegance and pulpit steel. At 39 she had already directed 1 infirmary, audited 2 parish ledgers, and spoken 9 times at Catholic temperance rallies, each lecture sharper than the last. Kavanagh summoned her to his Boston townhouse, offered tea, then unveiled floor plans of the Baron's Folly. She traced a finger along the hidden passageways and said, almost to herself, "Every shepherd deserves a private gate." The appointment letter bore the diocesan seal by dusk. Seraphina selected 2 lieutenants before leaving the Atlantic coast. The first, Sister Agatha Pierce, stood barely 5 feet yet accounted for every penny the way a jeweler weighs carats. Raised by a Pennsylvania bookkeeper who drilled arithmetic with metronomic patience, Agatha's handwriting marched in soldierly columns. No flourish, only precision. She was 36, cheeks dimpled when she smiled, which she did often to disarm auditors who underestimated her. Her reputation at St. Winifred's involved balancing the infirmary budget to the last cent while secretly funneling surplus blankets to Irish dock workers during a typhus wave. Seraphina liked that dual instinct, rigor outwardly, mercy privately. She offered Agatha the post of bursar, hinting that the new convent's books would be complex. The second deputy came with a shadow. Sister Honorée Whitlock was 38 and tall enough to look most priests in the eye. Trained at Philadelphia's Catholic Medical College for Women, she could set a compound fracture in candlelight or coax an obstinate fever with poultices distilled from wild willow bark. Her brother, Dr. Lucius Whitlock, had been expelled from the Chicago Medical Society after rumors of unauthorized procedures on immigrant girls. Honorée never spoke of him, but Seraphina had studied the tribunal records. She understood leverage. "You may keep the infirmary, sister," she promised, "and write your own supply lists. In exchange, I may send certain patients who require, as you once wrote, discreet care." Honorée's acceptance was near imperceptible, a single nod, eyes steady, as though she had already measured dosage and risk. With Bishop, Mother Superior, and deputies aligned, recruitment began. 20 novices were procured, no gentler verb suffices, from parishes spanning County Clare to Trento. Each application emphasized docility, musical aptitude, pleasitine, non-countenance, and youth. Passage was paid under the pretense of staffing an orphanage in America's interior, where Catholic witness was supposedly feeble. The novices disembarked in Baltimore, their trunks tagged simply Aurelia, and were herded onto westbound trains. None spoke more than rudimentary English. Most mistook the prairie for unclaimed wilderness. They would later recall that Mother Seraphina greeted them one by one at the station, touching a gloved finger to each girl's chin, tilting faces toward the light as if inspecting porcelain for hairline cracks. When spring thaw unfurled the pine boughs, the convent formally opened. Lake Vermilion residents, mostly Lutheran millers and Scandinavian dairymen, regarded the limestone wings with wary resignation. The sisters, veils crisply starched, marched through town distributing bowls of barley soup to influenza victims and whispering Latin blessings. Within a month, rumors shifted. The newcomers fixed broken ribs at no charge, delivered breech calves, educated orphaned children in letters and sums. The public mission gleamed: orphanage, clinic, soup kitchen. Bishop Kavanaugh's pastoral letter praised Christ's fortress rising among the pines. Inside, another architecture took shape. Trap doors that artisans assumed would store root vegetables acquired iron bolts on the inside. The south wing's attic windows were replaced with mirrored panes so bright they resembled star metal by daylight. Behind them, visiting benefactors could observe the cloister garden unseen. The private rail spur was cleared of weeds, rails hammered straight, and a short platform assembled under the cover of darkness. Local boys, sneaking cigarettes near the woodline, reported lanterns at odd hours and heavy trunks loaded without manifest. Seraphina organized the novices into silent ranks, assigning them to embroidery, apothecary, or kitchen duty depending on complexion and temperament. Sister Agatha recorded each girl's measurements, height, hair shade, dental health, in a ledger locked within the bursary. A separate column labeled Virtues received coded marks. A perfect circle for those unblemished by worldly touch, a crescent for the uncertain, a black star for the resistant. Resistance meant additional confession sessions in the vaulted basement, where acoustics swallowed screams and returned only faint echoes, easily mistaken for furnace groans. Honorée converted the former smoking lounge into an infirmary of surgical cleanliness, scrubbing mahogany panels until they reflected the lamplight like anxious water. She stocked laudanum by the gallon, chloroform by the crate, quinine, morphine, ether, and a curious compound labeled simply Whitlock Mix No. 4, formula unknown outside the siblings. She kept meticulous notes on metabolization, how quickly a Bavarian novice succumbed to 2 milliliters versus an Irish girl fed on oats, how bruises could be prevented by timely foxglove tincture, how hymenal integrity might be examined with minimal lasting damage. These observations found their way by courier to Dr. Whitlock, who annotated them in invisible ink, then mailed delicate corrections back under the guise of medical journals. Mother Seraphina, meanwhile, entertained patrons in what locals assumed was the convent rectory, but the sisters dubbed the guest loft. Velvet drapes spilled to Turkish carpets. A maple sideboard held cognac aged in Napoleon's final decade. The guests, rail magnates, grain speculators, even a state senator, never crossed the cloister threshold in daylight. They arrived after Compline, escorted through the north gate by a lay brother hired expressly for his broad shoulders and ragged on science. When the senator from Springfield emerged before dawn, collar askew, he donated $500 to the orphanage and wired another $1,000 to Bishop Kavanagh's cathedral fund. The town newspaper ran a flattering profile on his philanthropy. The orphans received 2 additional blankets. The novices noticed peculiar renovations. 2-way mirrors disguised as devotional mosaics allowed unseen eyes to study the chapel stalls during Latin chant. A narrow stair behind the sacristy led down to the rail platform. Crates marked mission Bibles traveled that route southward, though no parish ever reported receiving them. Once, Sister Elena, a Neapolitan girl with a habit of humming Ave Maria while folding linens, found a strand of blonde hair snagged on a nail beside the stair. She pocketed it, puzzled, then awoke 3 nights later to Mother Seraphina's pale gaze at the dormitory door. By morning, Eleanor had been transferred to an infirmary in Kansas City and her bunk reassigned without ceremony. Word of the convent's efficiency spread. Tuberculosis patients walked out breathing easier. Infants abandoned on saloon steps were christened and nourished. Widowers received discreet stipends after their wives died under Sister Honore's gentle opiates. Gratitude purchased silence. Each public success papered over whispered accounts. The baker's assistant who glimpsed a novice boarding a freight car at midnight, eyes glassy with either devotion or drug. The blacksmith's boy who found a silver ring engraved Dominic near the rail spur, its band warped as if wrenched from a reluctant finger. Bishop Kavanagh visited quarterly, praising Seraphina's austere stewardship. He dined in the refectory, complimented the barley soup, then disappeared into the bursary with Agatha. The following week, bricks arrived for the cathedral in progress, along with stained glass imported from Venice, Christ rendered in cobalt, so deep parishioners felt themselves drowning in it. No laity asked how a frontier diocese funded such splendor. The bishop's ledger simply listed anonymous benefaction. Inside Saint Aurelia's library, Seraphina kept a locked folio titled De Sponsa Tenebrarum, of the Bride of Darkness. Novice Victoria, dusting shelves, once heard Seraphina whisper to it as though to a confidant, "Our dowry grows by night." Some swore she slept only 2 hours, pacing corridors with rosary beads clicking like distant metronomes. Others claimed her eyes glowed in lamplight, a trick of reflection perhaps, or the sheen of ambition. She taught homiletics weekly, extolling silence. True obedience is the language angels speak when mortals die. The orphans, oblivious to the deeper commerce, adored Seraphina. She read them fables of saints who tamed wolves, pressed sugared violets into their palms on feast days, and promised that discipline would carve their souls into crystal. Yet every kindness came weighed on invisible scales. Children old enough to recall the faces of vanished novices were reassigned to distant parishes, adoption papers processed in record time. Sister Agatha filed each departure under providential placement and balanced the bursary to the penny. Honore's infirmary became a place of both healing and erasure. Laborers with mangled hands received skillful bandages. Novices who questioned accounting ledgers drank tea that left them drowsy, memories hazed. One girl, Sister Rita, woke in the infirmary unable to speak above a whisper. Honore diagnosed laryngitis. Within a week, Rita was on a rail car north, escort assigned, destination unrecorded. By 1886, the convent's reputation for charity lured pilgrims. They donated oil, bread, even dowry coins for sisters they deemed angelic. Pilgrims were shown the orchard, the tidy graves of infants claimed by winter croup, the orphanage classroom where chalk dust haloed lamplight like innocence made visible. They never saw the subterranean vault where Agatha and Seraphina tallied revenues, transfer fees from a Memphis boarding house, commissions from a New Orleans salon specializing in exotic performances, hush payments from a Chicago alderman who had spent a weekend in the guest loft and left blood on fine linen. Local Protestant leaders, sensing their congregation's curiosity, tempered gossip with half admiration, half fear. Pastor Wilhelm Nordgreen conceded from the pulpit, "Their service is impressive, but remember, Rome is adept at veils." His parishioners reduced donations to Lutheran missions by 15% that year, diverting coin to the convent soup kitchen, where their poorer kin found relief. Thus, charity became the camouflage of commerce, and commerce the engine of expansion. Saint Aurelia's fortress in the pines stood impeccable, walls whitewashed anew each Pentecost, choir voices floating like incense, rails polished for midnight cargo. No bell rope cracked under strain, no ledger showed red ink, and no lawman dared question Mother Seraphina's quarterly statement. All sisters accounted for in Christ. Winter settled over Lake Vermilion like a stone lid, muffling every sound beneath drifts that creaked when stepped upon and then swallowed the echo. The convent's north wing ran so cold that oil lamps shivered in their brackets. Each novice slept beneath 2 wool blankets, breath frosting the dim dormitory air. On the night of 27th of December 1888, Compline ended later than usual because Sister Clara Mariani, only 21 and already renowned for a soprano pure enough to coax tears from iron-spined bishops, sustained the final Amen a heartbeat longer than the rubric allowed. The tone hung in the chapel rafters like a filament of silver glass, and some of the younger sisters glanced up as though heaven itself might respond. They did not yet realize it was Clara's farewell. By 10 o'clock the cloister corridors were dark, the rule of silence in force. Snow ticked against mullioned panes, furnace pipes clanged below as coal settled. 2 novices noticed Clara's cot remained crisply made, rosary gone from the nail above the pillow. Such absence was not unheard of. Mother Seraphina occasionally summoned sisters for nocturnal prayer counseling, but those sessions ended before matins. At 3 a.m., matins bell rang. Clara's place in choir was empty. The candle she had lit at Lectio still guttered on the credence table, wax puddling to one side in a shape that looked disturbingly like a question mark. Before Lauds, Seraphina convened refectory assembly. Her voice floated above the clatter of tin bowls like cool incense. "Sister Clara," she announced, "has been called by Rome. An urgent mission of mercy to our orphanage partners in New Orleans. She departed by the early milk train with apostolic blessing." No further explanation followed. The novices bowed their heads. Curiosity was a weed punished at Saint Aurelia's. Only Father Elias Byrne, chaplain since the convent's founding, felt a tightening behind his ribs. He knew every diocese in the region and could recite rail schedules like psalms. There was no milk train southward before dawn, and church protocol forbade transfers without written faculties. Yet Seraphina displayed no parchment, only a serene smile that acknowledged no possibility of inquiry. Snowstorm or no, Byrne traced Clara's probable path in his mind, from dormitory to east stairs, down the undocumented passage that Masons once joked looked more like a smuggler's chute than a processional hall. He waited until sext, when Seraphina habitually inspected the infirmary, and slipped away. Years earlier he had discovered a crawl space behind the organ loft, an attic storeroom long since forgotten, where cast-off reliquaries and hymnals rested beneath shawls of cobweb. If Clara had left of her own volition, she would have taken her travel valise, but perhaps she had come here first to pray or to hide. The crawlspace hatch groaned. Byrne winced, crossing himself instinctively, and released a gust of air sour with bat guano. Sunlight, filtered through slats, revealed relic cases stacked like coffins. Atop one lay a black rosary, beads worn shiny by constant use. Clara's. He recognized the small nick on the crucifix where she had once dropped it against the stone floor during the feast of Saint Cecilia. One bead, 7th from the cross, lay fractured. A syrupy residue clung to the crack, dark as molasses, giving off a medicinal tang he knew from battlefield infirmaries, laudanum, opium dissolved in alcohol. He pinched the fragment in his handkerchief, breathing through his sleeve. Laudanum in a nun's rosary meant sedation, not prayer. Someone had dosed Clara, or lured her to dose herself. Byrne's pulse hammered while gusts rattled the eaves overhead like thin applause. He searched for additional clues, footprints in dust, thread from a veil, but found only the hush of timber beams settling. Yet the rosary alone outweighed the silence. He tucked it inside his cassock pocket behind the breviary, resolving to secure a chemist's test in town. At Vespers, Mother Seraphina delivered a homily on obedience that flowed like oil, yet coated every conscience with chill. A bride of Christ travels where her groom commands. Earthbound permissions are but shadows of heaven's charter. Her glacier blue gaze drifted to Byrne. He lowered his eyes, fearing she could smell suspicion, the way wolves scent blood. After final antiphon, he retired directly to his cell and barred the door, a habit he had never needed until that night. Candle stub trembling, he drafted a letter to Bishop Kavanagh. He enumerated facts without rhetoric. Clara missing, supposed mission unsupported by documentation, evidence of narcotic substance found on personal sacramental. He wrote of rumors whispered by novices that trunks departed on the private spur at hours when sisters were forbidden corridors, that certain donors visited after Compline and left before Lords, that Sister Honoré requisitioned laudanum in quantities unfit for a rural infirmary. He concluded, "For the sake of souls entrusted to our care, I beg your excellency to dispatch an ecclesiastical visitation without delay." He sealed the plea with the hard wax kept for sacramental certificates and stamped it with his personal signet, 3 interlaced fishes borrowed from his Aran ancestors. He debated sending it through regular post and risk interception, or delivering it by hand, an impossibility while Seraphina controlled every gate. Finally, he addressed the envelope in his tight slanted script, slipped it beneath his cloak, and planned a pre-dawn ride to the county telegraph office. He did not see in the candle's dying glow the shadow that paused outside the keyhole, nor hear the retreating rustle of a habit hem-brushing stone. Night thickened. Wind veered into the pine groves with a keening note, as if mocking the soprano now absent. Somewhere below, a trap-door thudded shut, dull, final. Byrne pressed the bead-filled handkerchief to his chest like a relic and knelt beside his cot. His whispered prayer trembled, not an invocation of hope, but a vow to follow the rosary's broken trail, however deep into darkness it spiraled. Open loop sealed. The letter waited, cooling like iron before the forge, and Clara's last sustained high C seemed still to ring, inaudible yet undeniable, inside walls too old and too hungry for innocence. The ledger surfaced in the spring of 1940 when a Works Progress Administration team cleared mildew-rotted crates from the disused chancery basement of the Diocese of Chicago. WPA clerk Margaret Dunleavy, 24, meticulous, allergic to dust, unlatched a walnut coffer stamped, well, W initials no one on staff recognized. Inside lay a calfskin book, its brass clasp tarnished to the color of old blood. The first 2 pages were blank, but halfway in, a single immaculate entry occupied the center of a sheet, as if the scribe wished to frame the crime in a halo of empty parchment. Deck, 1888, CM, Virgo Intacta, $280. No commentary, no destination, only a ruling pen's razor-fine strokes and a final flourish under the dollar figure, shaped like a serpent swallowing its tail. Dunleavy, noting the date and the initials, flagged the volume for diocesan review. The archivist, a monsignor with shaky hands, told her the book must be reshelved. The WPA budget paid them to catalogue hymnal receipts, not private diaries. She copied the line anyway, tucking the slip into her cigarette case. 6 weeks later, Dunleavy sat across from folklorist Harold Leader at a Hyde Park diner and slid him the copied line. Leader, already chasing rumours about Saint Aurelia's missing novices, matched CM to Clara Mariani in his notebook. He knew the convent's internal shipping ledgers, obtained from a retired freight dispatcher, listed a wooden crate sealed on the 16th of December 1888, 2 days after Clara vanished. The crate bore serial 3867A and was labelled Liturgical Linens, Handle with Reverence. It journeyed south on the Illinois Central Night Freight, changing numbers only once, at Cairo. From there it boarded the Memphis spur, with the conductor's manifest marking its consignee as House of the Rising Sun, Aten, Madame Rousseau. Leader's pulse quickened. He had interviewed former brothel laundresses who recalled novices arriving in steamer trunks, girls pale from laudanum, rosaries still indenting their fingers. Each was presented to select clientele as Virgo Intacta, a guarantee whose worth fluctuated with demand. $280 matched Rousseau's 1888 price tier for a fresh sister. The concordance between the ledger's line and the freight log left little doubt. Dr. Lucius Whitlock, expelled physician, brother to Sister Honoré, had certified Clara's body as merchandise. Pressed between other pages, Dunleavy found faint carbon imprints, mirror images of transactions now lost, ghostly dollar signs, half digits, the looping tail of an F in the Latin word foemina. Chemical dusting at the University of Chicago's crime lab coaxed out 5 more names, each reduced to initials, every entry spaced exactly 1 month apart. Scholars would later argue the ledger served not as a running balance, but as a commemorative register, a private reliquary for Whitlock's commerce in purity. By comparing shipment dates with the convent's visitor logs, those Sister Agatha catalogued so scrupulously, Leader confirmed a pattern. Dr. Whitlock arrived the day before each departure, carrying battered medical valises. He signed the register simply medical consultant and vanished after dusk. The novices saw his silhouette crossing the courtyard, white gloves flicking ash from a cheroot. They called him the Midnight Doctor and pressed scapulars to their chests whenever his boots clicked the cloister tiles. The diocese attempted quiet containment. They sealed the ledger in a vault labelled Irregular Finances and reassigned Dunleavy to rural parish census work. Yet photocopies circulated in academic grey literature. A Jesuit historian, Father Timothy Vargas, pored over the scans and noted that the handwriting matched prescriptions Whitlock had penned in Chicago's Mercy Hospital before his license was revoked. Vargas also discovered marginalia invisible to casual eyes, microscopic dots of red ink beside each entry. On a hunch, he overlaid the dots on a rail map of the Midwest. They aligned with connection cities, Kankakee, Cairo, Jackson, like waypoints on an unholy pilgrimage. Far south, in Memphis municipal archives, Leader located invoices from Madame Rousseau's House of the Rising Sun. One bill of lading, dated 20th of December 1888, acknowledged receipt of 1 ritual vestment container and listed a surcharge for unblemished condition. Rousseau's signature looped flamboyantly beneath, but a second, hand, angular, clinical, added in smaller script, balance of $280 settled in cash. The analyst's eye recognized Whitlock's pen again, turning the ledger's private boast into public ledger. With every document, Clara's fate hardened from rumor to arithmetic. Date, initials, price, destination, even the crate's dimensions, 5 feet 3 inches by 22 inches, matched Clara's slight frame. Witness testimony in Memphis spoke of a girl with nightingale throat forced to sing Ave Maria in a salon where brandy vapors mingled with cigar smoke. 3 weeks later, she lost her voice. 6 months later, she disappeared into the Mississippi fog, her ledger value fully amortized. Back in Chicago, Dunleavy met Vargas under vaulted library ceilings smelling of mold and prayer. They debated bringing the evidence to civil court, but every lawyer warned the statute of limitations had lapsed, and the church wielded attorneys who turned truth into penance. Still, Vargas scheduled a meeting with Archbishop Harding. The prelate received him in a parlor gilded like a reliquary, heard the summary, then closed his eyes as though reciting mental liturgy. When he looked up, he promised an internal inquiry and escorted Vargas out through a corridor lined with saints painted triumphant and incorruptible. Nothing came of the promised inquiry. The ledger remained sealed, Harding was promoted to a Roman commission, and Dunleavy's WPA report vanished from federal archives. But the photocopies outlived their guardians, whispering through seminar discussions, inspiring footnotes in dissertations that hinted yet never dared to name. Each whisper returned to the same line. CM, Virgo intacta, $280. The sum itself demands context. In 1888, a journeyman carpenter earned $2 a day. A modest farmhouse cost $900. The brothel paid nearly a third of a working man's yearly wage for a single night with a novice still wearing a crucifix. The church, preaching poverty, profited through cathedral donations that rose in step with every disappearance. Gold leaf that gilded the high altar in Kavanagh's shrine can be measured ounce for ounce against Clara's ransom, bright metal for blood-bought silence. Where then did Whitlock bank the balance? A ledger note tucked at the back, written in hurried shorthand, references: new instrument acquired, cost defrayed by recent consignment, sister remains docile under number 4 formula. Historians believe the instrument was a speculum fitted with a locking mechanism, Whitlock's innovation for rapid examinations, ensuring merchandise remained Virgo intacta until delivery. The device now resides in a medical oddities collection, tagged Origin Disputed. Most chilling is the flourish encircling the dollar figure, an Ouroboros whose head bites its tail precisely through the digit 8, symbol of infinity. Whitlock, it seems, viewed the trade as a perfect circle, purity converted to gold, gold funding further purity to harvest. Comment your country. Has this story ever surfaced where you live? Your pin lights up our map. Bishop Michael Kavanagh liked to compare a cathedral to a vineyard, every stone a grape pressed for the vintage of eternity. After Sister Clara vanished, the bishop received an envelope from Saint Aurelia's containing a single cashier's draft for $1,200, equal to 6 months of diocesan pew rents. The covering note, penned in Mother Seraphina's immaculate hand, called the sum a contribution of thanksgiving for newly opened missionary pathways. Kavanagh endorsed the draft to the Cathedral of the Immaculate Promise Building Fund and ordered the masons to resume work on the south transept, a project stalled by winter frost. The very week the check cleared, scaffolding clattered back into place, and quarry wagons rolled in from Joliet laden with cream-colored limestone that shimmered even under gun-grey skies. Parishioners struggling through a national recession marveled at the rapid progress. Blocks rose course upon course, hoisted by steam derricks whose engine whistles cut through prairie stillness like herald trumpets. Inside the chancery ledgers, the donation appeared as Anonymous Benefaction, Route 123. Route 123 was an internal shorthand, Sister Agatha's invention, for funds wired through the savings bank adjacent to the rail spur. No one outside the inner circle could decode it, and Kavanagh never asked. If the Lord chose uncanny channels to underwrite his house, the bishop would not impede grace with forensic scruples. 2 months later, another novice disappeared. Sister Helena, German, slight of stature, quick with Latin declensions. Again, a bank draft arrived within 48 hours, the same precise figure, 1,200. Kavanagh's face, already lean from fasting, took on a translucent glow. He authorized the spires. Architectural drawings that had rested in a drawer since the convent purchase were suddenly practical. Twin towers, each 140 feet, would pierce the sunlit haze and announce Catholic permanence across 40 miles of Protestant farmland. Stonecutters shaped lancet arches in rhythmic clinks that echoed like rosary beads striking chalice rims. Questions rose among the laity as quickly as the masonry. Old farmers wondered aloud how a frontier diocese funded Venetian-stained glass when drought had brutalized wheat yields. Choir mothers murmured that the new spires seemed to extend heavenward in step with missing sisters back at the convent. Yet each time rumor threatened to solidify, church doors swung open to reveal another luminous panel just installed, Saint Michael hurling Lucifer into a jewel-bright abyss, St. Agnes cradling her lamb amid rubies of martyrdom. Congregants fell silent before the colored blaze, their doubts refracted into reverence, their pockets opening for collection baskets. Behind the sacristy of Saint Aurelia's, Sister Benedicta documented more earthly truths. She was an archivist by appointment, but a detective by vocation, her faith alloyed with a historian's steel insistence on dates, ink, and marginalia. Each time a novice was reported transferred, Benedicta copied the girl's baptismal name onto a plain linen fiber prayer card, edged it with a narrow band of violet ink, and pressed it between the pages of her Vulgate at Psalm 88. Shall thy loving kindness be declared in the grave, or thy faithfulness in destruction? She chose that verse because it named what she feared, a charity proclaimed only over tombs, a faithfulness measured by ruin. The cards accumulated, discreet tombstones no one else saw. 11 lay concealed now, each dated in her neat librarian's hand. The leaves of her Bible had thickened, the paper swelling with silent witness until the spine creaked when opened. Benedicta noticed patterns Agatha's spreadsheets buried under euphemism. The disappearances always preceded liturgical high points requiring expensive adornment, Advent greenery, Easter lilies, Corpus Christi canopies brocaded with gold thread. A girl gone meant a new reliquary, embossed and gleaming. She calculated that the cathedral consumed bodies like fuel, a ratio of 1 human life to 4 feet of steeple or 2 panels of imported glass. The math sickened her, yet she continued recording because record-keeping was her shield against despair. If no one remembered the names, evil would finish its work unopposed. One late afternoon she climbed the belfry to dust pigeon droppings from ledgers stored under tarps. Through the louver she glimpsed the distant cathedral rising on the horizon, its stones catching the slant light. The twin spires now pierced the sky like needles drawing blood from clouds. She imagined each draft of $1,200 mortared into those towers, sealing cries of women who would never sing again. A gust rattled the veil still pinned to the convent bell, and the opium stain, though faded, seemed to pulse. Benedicta pressed her palm to the bell's cold bronze and promised Clara, Helena, Agnes, and all unnamed, "You are not erased." When Mother Seraphina next announced a transfer, Sister Magdalene, gone to teach catechism among the Choctaw, Benedicta added a 12th card. As she slid it above Psalm 88, the spine finally split, a thin pop echoing her own resolve. She realized the ledger of flesh was now too heavy for secrecy. Some record had to exit these walls, but where could she send it? The bishop's purse was drenched in the same currency that purchased silence. The civil authorities knelt beside those stained glass windows every Sunday, dazzled into complicity. Across town, stonemasons crowned the left spire with a copper cross delivered on a wagon drawn by 4 black percherons. Villagers gathered to watch the ascent. The sun dipped low, turning the metal to fire. Children clapped. Their mothers whispered that heaven itself approved. In that moment, the questions, like embers, drifted upward and vanished among the colors of evening. The wind carried chants from the convent, voices of sisters still present, or was it the gone ones singing through newly hollowed air? Benedicta descended the tower stairwell carrying her fractured Bible. She entered the scriptorium, lit a stub of candle, and opened a clean ledger. On the first page she wrote a title in crimson ink, Index of the Lost. Beneath it she listed the 11 names, leaving space for more, fearing she would need it soon. Then she dipped the quill again and began a second column in smaller letters. The amounts, each 1,200, each matched to a date carved in stained glass. The numbers, stacked one upon another, rose like a ledger of sin converted into spires, testimony that heaven-pointing towers could be built from earth's most silent graves. Father Elias Byrne wrote with deliberate slowness, knowing each stroke committed him to open war with his own hierarchy. 3 full pages detailed the missing novices, the narcotic residue on Clara's rosary bead, the midnight freight trunks, labeled liturgical linens. He concluded with a priest's plea cut from bone. For the love of souls entrusted to us, Holy See must dispatch investigators unbound by diocesan influence. Convent walls conceal commerce unfit for any bride of Christ. At dawn, he sealed the letter with crimson wax and pressed his ring, the intertwined fishes of his Irish clan, deep into the soft glaze. The journey to the telegraph station took him 3 hours over frozen ruts. He purchased a registered pouch to Rome, paid a surcharge to ensure it traveled under diplomatic seal, and watched the clerk lock the satchel inside an iron chest bound for Chicago's transatlantic courier. Relief tremored through him. The chain of custody was ironclad. The devil, he told himself, would have to unravel steel to intercept it. Weeks passed. Snow melted into the river's black shoulders. On the 12th of February 1889, a parchment bearing the papal arms arrived for Byrne by special courier. The letter praised his pastoral zeal, but reassured him that an internal audit, conducted by competent persons empowered by the Holy Office, had revealed no impropriety at Saint Aurelia's. Your worries, though born of prudence, may rest in Christ, it concluded, bearing a signature that should have belonged to Cardinal Nardi, yet lacked his customary flourishing. Byrne's stomach cinched into ice. The Vatican seal looked genuine, but the Latin contained a provincial idiom, metu super vacuo, that Nardi never employed. Someone had forged Rome's voice. The only power with motive and reach enough was the very diocese he served. Refusing the imposed silence, Byrne contacted Eloise Hammond, a journalist whose exposés of factory abuse had toppled 2 Chicago aldermen. They agreed to meet in the convent laundry at midnight on the 3rd of March, when boilers hissed loud enough to cloak conversation, and when Seraphina patrolled the infirmary, far from soapy steam. Hammond would enter through the garden culvert. Byrne would unlock the interior grate. He smuggled her a sketch of passageways and warned her to carry nothing traceable, only a shorthand pad, and courage, he wrote. At 11:30, the moon hung dull as pewter. Byrne hitched his bay gelding to a light buggy for the 5-mile ride to the culvert entrance near Deadman's Creek. The night air smelled of thawing mud and pine pitch. He carried the rosary bead in a cotton pouch, determined to place tangible evidence in Hammond's hands. If church courts refused justice, the court of public opinion might yet roar. What happened on the rutted lane beside Deadman's remains conjecture pieced from hoofprints, a broken lantern, and the mute witness of trampled snow. Farmers found the Byrne, uggy at dawn, overturned in a ragged thicket 30 yards from the creek bank. One wheel spun idly, reins sliced clean, not frayed, a surgeon's cut. The horse grazed nearby, skittish but unharmed. Byrne lay unconscious beneath the axle, cassock soaked in creek water. No bruises suggested robbery, no purse was taken. When he stirred, he clutched his breast as if to check his heart had not fallen out. In his inner coat pocket the rosary pouch remained, but the bead itself had dissolved into a smear of sticky residue, as though heat or reagent had consumed its shape, leaving only scent. Bystanders lifted him onto a plank and carried him to Sister Honore's infirmary. She pressed chloroform to his lips before he could speak. Novices later whispered, she murmured, "The doctor will be pleased." Hammond, waiting in the culvert, heard distant bells strike 1, then 2, then 3. No footsteps approached. She retreated before dawn, believing she had been betrayed. Her notebook recorded a single frustrated line, "Priest absent, suspect silenced." Byrne awoke 3 days later, memories fogged, throat raw. Seraphina visited, her blue eyes sluiced of warmth. She thanked him for obedience under trial and produced a letter, his, signed Stamped and returned, its contents amended to report no cause for alarm. He understood then that his plea had indeed reached Rome, only to be intercepted by the same hands, now offering him laudanum for the pain. He refused the draft and whispered, "Truth floats, even when drowned." Seraphina's smile barely flickered. "Then let us pray it does not freeze." Eloise Hammond returned to Saint Aurelia's in late March under a linen bonnet and the surname Hartley, carrying a wooden sewing box scarred by years in mill workrooms. Mother Seraphina needed extra hands to stitch Easter vestments. An advertisement in the Catholic Herald had asked for quiet needlewomen. Hammond answered in copperplate, citing convent tuition she'd never received, and presented forged letters of virtue from a Boston sacristan who did not exist. Sister Agatha examined the references, weighed the stranger's calm eyes, then ushered her to the seamstress dormer above the refectory. There Hammond stowed her true tool, a pocket notebook bound in oilcloth, pages pre-numbered so any theft would reveal itself. Each evening she wrote beneath a kerosene lamp, whose chimney she'd blackened to dull its glow. Her script was tight, reporter's shorthand curling like iron shavings. The first entry captured the geography of sin. North cellar, 4 canvassed pallets, silk restraints coiled like dead serpents, odor clove chloroform strong enough to sting the throat. She noted a small stove, enamel chipped, heating a pan of water that steamed without food, chloroform vaporized more evenly in warmth. A rack of braided hemp collars hung nearby, each tagged with a sister's initial inked in Sister Honore's square physician's hand. Hammond dipped a handkerchief pretending to sneeze and confirmed the clove-sweet bite of laudanum in the air. The cellar door locked from the outside. On Monday the 3rd of March, her journal's lines tightened. Half moon, clouds low. 3 gentlemen arrived by covered barouche just after Compline, silk top hats flashing when lanterns caught their brims. They entered through the infirmary porch. Within an hour, a moan slipped into the corridor, muffled by a woman's palm. At 3:45, a steamer trunk, mahogany, brass-bound, size of a coffin for a chi. This was wheeled to the rail spur on a dolly, guided by the lay brother called Callahan. The guests followed, laughing in low baritones, one swinging a gold watch chain that winked like a firefly. Sister Honore stood at the platform ledger, gloved fingers counting bills thick enough to bend. When dawn bled violet over the pines, only wheel ruts and straw remained. Hammond's next page mapped the finance trail. Patrons, grain speculator. B, mill union lawyer. H, unknown senator, southern accent. She sketched the senator's signet ring, a pelican feeding her young, which she would later match to a roster of Memphis elites. She finished the night's record with a question boxed in pencil. Price per bride. Beneath, she taped a single crimson thread she'd plucked from Sister Teresa's torn sleeve when the novice stumbled from the cellar, eyes lacquered with laudanum, humming the Sanctus out of key. After 10 days, Hammond judged her notes lethal enough to breach clerical armor. She wrapped the notebook in brown paper, addressed it to Harold Leider at the Chicago Tribune, and walked to the village post office under pretense of fetching ribbon. Postmaster Abel Hancock weighed the parcel, affixed 2 green 1-cent stamps, then set it on the outgoing shelf. Hammond watched until the stage driver loaded mailbags and clapped reins. Only then did she breathe, a shallow, premature victory. 3 mornings later, Hancock himself rode to the convent, hat in trembling hands. A priest in Roman collar, neither local nor previously seen, had appeared at his window bearing the Archbishop's embossed card. He claimed the parcel for doctrinal review, citing canon authority over all convent communications. No receipt, only a warning. Certain writings mislead the faithful. Hancock tried to refuse. The priest produced a sheriff's badge glinting beneath the cassock. The postmaster surrendered the notebook, then came to warn its author, unsure whether she was inmate or accomplice. Seraphina intercepted him in the courtyard, thanked him for safeguarding ecclesial integrity, and escorted him away before he uttered a full sentence. When evening fell, Hammond rifled her trunk, blank except for spools of thread. She climbed to the dormer rafters, finding the hiding hollow she had gouged behind a rafter knot now empty, save for a shred of oilcloth. Someone had searched with surgical care. At Compline, Seraphina's homily praised Saint Catherine of Siena, who carved letters of obedience upon her heart instead of parchment. Her gaze alighted on the seamstress, a breath too long. Hammond realized her chronicle, the dark bride papers, she had begun calling them in private, was gone, destination unknown. Yet she felt no defeat, only grim acceleration. Disappearance proved importance. She began a second notebook that very night, smaller, pages thin as onion skin, meant to slip inside her corset should the first attempt resurface, shredded to pulp. The open question lingered like incense after Mass. Who now turned those pages in secret rooms, and how long before the evidence re-emerged, or was buried beside another silent bride? Sister Benedicta waited until the convent garden stood hushed beneath a slate-colored dusk. For weeks she had rehearsed the words, turning them over like stone, as that hid serpents. Now, with no witnesses but the statues, she stepped before Mother Seraphina. 11 cards, Mother. How many graves? She held the Vulgate open at Psalm 88, purple-edged slips fluttering in the wind, each one a novice's name. Seraphina's smile was slow, luminous, as though the question were a compliment. "Obedience is lighter than a coffin lid," she murmured, and with a gloved hand closed the Bible as easily as one snuffs a taper. 2 lay brothers emerged from the shadowed arcade. Benedicta neither cried out nor stepped back. Her gaze stayed fixed on that glacial smile, while rough fingers seized her upper arms. The Bible fell, spine cracked, the 11 cards scattering like albino moths across the winter grass. They dragged her through the cloister passage, past the sacristy smelling of wax and lilies, down a stone stair few novices knew existed. Behind the chapel's foundation yawned an old coal pit, half emptied since boilers had been upgraded. Its walls wept soot, and the floor sloped toward a drainage sluice clogged with black water. A single hurricane lamp cast a jaundiced nimbus over iron rungs set into the wall. Benedicta was lowered by rope until her feet splashed ankle-deep. The trapdoor clanged shut, bolt drawn. Matins rang 4 hours later, and every stroke of the bell drowned her first screams. She called each novice by name, forging a litany the coal dust swallowed. On the second day she tried to scale the wall, nails breaking against slick stone. On the third, her voice stripped raw, she sang Psalm 88 through cracked lips. "Shall thy loving kindness be declared in the grave?" Ash flakes drifted from the ceiling, soot stirred by the organ above. On the 5th night, a delegation arrived unannounced. Father Drouin, diocesan inspector, flanked by 2 civil deputies carrying lanterns and writs. Mother Seraphina guided them courteously through refectory, infirmary, guest loft, everything gleaming, candles trimmed, novices kneeling in perfect silence. When Drouin asked for Sister Benedicta, Seraphina produced a travel letter signed by the bishop himself, authorizing a temporary retreat to Milwaukee. The deputies accepted the paper, but Drouin requested to view the archives Benedicta had overseen. They found the scriptorium immaculate, ledgers alphabetized, ink bottles full, yet inside the fireplace lay a mound of charred scraps, half-burned prayer cards rimmed in violet. The inspectors stooped. Light revealed a solitary name still legible in fragile ash, Agnes Benedetta. Drouin's mouth tightened, but before he could question further, Seraphina invited him to Vespers, assuring him the ashes were merely outdated notations. After midnight, the lay brothers hoisted an emptied bucket of lye down the coal pit ladder and sluiced the walls until no handprint, no blood fleck, no psalm refrain remained. When the trapdoor reopened at dawn, only silence greeted them, obedient at last, lighter than any coffin lid. April 11th, 1890. Broke with a sky the colour of unhammered lead, wind snapping pine needles across the convent yard. At 11 minutes past midnight, Archbishop Reginald Harding's carriage halted before Saint Aurelia's gate, flanked by 2 county sheriffs and a quartet of Pinkerton detectives whose pocket watches beat louder than the crickets. Harding's crozier tapped once on the iron bars. When no porter appeared, the sheriffs forced the lock and the procession advanced, boots crunching over gravel that had never before known secular authority at such an hour. Inside, gas lamps flared under sudden flame, turning every corridor into a daguerreotype frozen mid-trespass. Detectives fanned out. In the root cellar, they discovered 6 wooden crates stenciled Hôtel du Lys, New Orleans. Straw packing spilled onto the dirt floor, revealing habit cloth, silk restraints, and ledgers wrapped in oil parchment. One detective tallied the ledger's columns, throat tightening at the final sum, $96,230, wages of sin transmuted into cathedral marble, nearly $3 million by modern reckoning. Upstairs, a faint medicinal odor guided another team to the pantry. 5 novices lay on pallets, wrists bound with powder blue ribbon, each girl breathing in shallow unison, laudanum still shining at the corners of their lips. A note pinned to the nearest ribbon read, "To prevent blemish S.H." The initials matched Sister Honoré Whitlock, absent from the infirmary she supposedly ruled. Harding pressed onward to the bursary, expecting confrontation, but found only an open safe and a scattering of quills. Mother Seraphina and Sister Agatha had vanished. Their veils, one starched black, one soft grey, hung from a peg by the south cloister gate, twisting in the draught like shed skins. Tracks of a 2-wheeled cart led across dew-dark grass to the spur line, where fresh cinders suggested a handcar had departed moments before the raiders arrived. No lanterns bobbed upon the horizon. The prairie swallowed all sign of flight. Detectives began sealing rooms, cataloguing evidence by lantern flash. Harding knelt beside the sedated sisters, tracing a trembling cross over each brow. "We are too late," he whispered, yet knew the real pursuit had just begun. Stretched now beyond county lines, perhaps beyond borders, wherever a rail could run and money could hush. The auctioneer's gavel cracked like a pistol in the parlour of the Whitlock estate, St. Louis, autumn 1911. Most bidders chased cut-glass decanters and velvet fauteuils, but freelance journalist Samuel Ward fixed on a battered steamer trunk, stamped CMW. He won it for $4, carted it to his boarding house, and pried the rusted lock with a cold chisel. Shirts yellowed by age filled the top layer, yet the trunk felt heavier than cotton warranted. Ward tapped the cedar plank beneath. It rang hollow. A penknife unseamed the false bottom to reveal 3 relics of dread. A small oilcloth notebook, pages buckled by water, yet ink still decipherable. Inside, cramped cursive identified the author, Eloise Hammond. Her entries resumed exactly where rumor claimed they had stopped in 1890. Cellar inventories, coded prices, the final line a jagged scrawl. "If I am taken, this book must speak." A fan of rail stubs dated 1888 and 1889, sequential, Lake Vermilion to Memphis, Memphis to Veracruz, via steamer. Each bore the initials S.H. in violet ink, Sister Honoré's ledger hand, and sliding against the velvet lining, a single rosary bead, darker than dried claret, tacky to the touch with opium gum. Its twin had vanished with Father Byrne. Ward sensed a career-making exposé. He spent 3 weeks cross-referencing manifests, interviewing retired Pinkertons, sketching the arterial map of a trade in veiled flesh. On the eve of publication, the St. Louis Tribune press room erupted in flames, so fierce linotype melted into silver puddles. Firemen swore kerosene fumes hung in the rafters. The official report dismissed them as printers' solvents. Insurance adjusters filed the loss under Act of God. Ward's drafts, notebook transcripts, even his carbon copies, all ash. Only the trunk survived, locked now in his attic, gathering dust while the world forgot Eloise Hammond's ink sty. Hell cried for air. The salt air of Veracruz pressed like damp gauze over Villa del Mar when workers began its 1912 renovation. They knocked through a parlor wall to expand the ballroom and uncovered a hidden sitting room. No windows, velvet curtains drawn tight for decades. At the center, two women sat forever locked in ceremony. Mummified bodies posed in high-back cane chairs, porcelain teacups poised at their lips as though the last sip had frozen time. Their habits had rotted to threads, but dental charts taken at the morgue confirmed familiar signatures: slight overbite on the taller frame, gold molar on the smaller, matching records of Mother Seraphina Lowell and Sister Agatha Pierce. Height measurements echoed the convent files: 5'8", 5'3". Silver rings on desiccated fingers bore the fleur-de-lis insignia once stamped on Seraphina's personal stationery. On the mahogany tea table rested a leather-bound journal, spine cracked open to a single ink-bloomed line. "He comes tonight. Payment in flesh overdue." The remaining pages were blank, suggesting last-minute confession or warning. No other volumes surfaced. Authorities widened the search. Gardeners tearing up bougainvillea roots struck bone. Police cordoned off the rose beds and exhumed 12 female skeletons in various states of decay, each wrapped in linen stamped with the crest of Hôtel du Lys. Some skulls still wore fragments of novice veils. A magistrate drafted charges for human trafficking, but within a week, files were stamped confidential and transferred to the Federal Archive after the U.S. consul lodged a request in the interest of bilateral harmony. Rumor insisted the journal's master was a Chicago financier whose patronage shielded the trade from Illinois to the Gulf. Yet when investigators requested Eloise Hammond's notebook for corroboration, they discovered its crucial pages, those listing Midwestern bank transfers, had been destroyed by seawater. The ink bled to a blue haze. Whatever name once floated there dissolved, leaving only the silence of tides and the hush of a garden that had grown its roses on graves. The prairie forgets quickly. Where Saint Aurelia's once hoarded its candles and its secrets, a cul-de-sac of vinyl-sided homes now curves around a playground. New residents plant marigolds above foundations broken into landfill, never knowing that the soil was sifted for evidence and then declared clean by men who refused to kneel. They barbecue on summer evenings, but in autumn fog a different smoke drifts between the houses, chilled, metallic, tinged with incense. On those nights, a single bronze tone seems to roll across the lawns at 3 a.m. Exactly one note, cut short, followed by a murmured Kyrie no living tongue can place. Furnace vents carry the echo indoors. Toddlers wake crying, convinced someone is singing outside their closet doors. Realtors blame settling ducts and the freight line 2 miles north. The state tried to put distance between the haunting and the record. All surviving evidence was boxed, ribboned in red tape, and stored beneath the Illinois archives. The carton is labeled 12B. Contents: Saint Aurelia, correspondence and receipts, restricted. A steel tag states the embargo ends 30th December 2089, 100 years after the Whitlock estate fire. Long enough, bureaucrats hope, for every witness to be dust. Researchers petition, are denied. Petition again. The response never varies. For the good of the faithful, silence. But silence is how the trade first prospered. If the bells says, till ring in steam and memory, they are asking who will listen before another century seals the lid. Type open the boxes in the comments if you believe the dark brides still deserve justice. Let the algorithm count your voice among the living. Demand the key. Share this story with one soul who trusts walls more than whispers, because shadows grow thicker when no one names them, and archives, like crypts, are easiest to guard when everyone above forgets what has been buried.